A long-forgotten camera in the most secure room of the palace. Now it silently screams the truth. But what if it captured more than betrayal? What if it recorded the very heart of the state itself? As technology advanced within the presidential palace, an old security system, deactivated and archived years ago, was accidentally reactivated during routine maintenance. With no human input, the outdated system automatically began exporting its stored footage. At first, the technician assumed he was reviewing standard surveillance, but within minutes the screen froze, and not from malfunction, but from shock. The footage was old, yes, but what it revealed was timeless. President Traoré's most trusted advisor, holding a secret late-night meeting with a foreign diplomat inside the palace. The camera angle is fixed. There is no sound, but body language tells the whole story. The advisor leans in intently, while the diplomat clutches a briefcase. After a quick greeting, they head straight toward the most secure part of the room, President Traoré's private desk. The footage cuts off there, but the message is loud and clear, because the meeting takes place inside the Blue Room, a chamber only accessible by the president himself. Intelligence officials send the footage directly to President Traoré. The atmosphere in the palace shifts instantly. On paper, the advisor still holds the title Chief Counselor for Loyalty, but the images speak another language. Traoré says nothing as he watches the footage. There is no rage on his face, no visible disappointment, only a silence that cuts deep. In that moment, he's not just watching a recording, he's reliving sworn oaths, shared plans, promises made. Not as a leader, but as a man, he feels the betrayal in his bones. But for a statesman, emotions that do not turn into action are dangerous. That night, Traoré acts. The palace security archives are pulled. The diplomat's identity is investigated. The advisor's last 3 months of phone records and emails are secretly examined. Yet there's one more detail no one has noticed. This footage didn't just capture a single meeting. As more files are uncovered, it becomes clear. This betrayal isn't isolated. More faces appear in the shadows. More whispers are heard in silence. The secrets buried in the quietest corner of the palace begin to scream. Just how deep do these recordings go? And with each second he watches, who does Traoré trust less? The outsiders or those closest to him? The first video was already a shock on its own, but the true depth of the betrayal began to unfold as the recordings continued. That silent meeting between the advisor and the foreign diplomat, it wasn't just a secret rendezvous, it resembled a symbolic oath. Upon closer inspection, something peculiar stood out. The two men exchanged a distinctive handshake. At first glance it seemed ordinary, but it wasn't. It was a coded gesture, known within international espionage circles as part of a covert greeting protocol. The intelligence unit immediately traced the origins of this symbol. Their findings confirmed that the handshake was part of a clandestine communication code used by a Central European spy network. And with that, a single chilling question echoed through everyone's minds. How could such a professional organization manage to infiltrate the president's most trusted circle? The answer came with the next video. Captured from the same fixed camera angle, a second meeting was uncovered, this time in one of the palace's most secure locations, the presidential study. Only 3 people had authorized access to this room: President Traoré, his chief of staff, and this advisor. It wasn't just a physical breach, it was a symbolic one. An act of betrayal right at the heart of the power. When Traoré watched the footage, he first lowered his head in silence. Then he leaned back and said just one sentence. Some betrayals don't break down the door. They sit at your table and share your tea. From that moment on, the president launched a deep but discreet investigation. The advisor's entire digital history, communication logs, international travel records, and known associations were all quietly reviewed. But Traoré kept the operation tightly contained, involving only a handful of his most loyal agents. He knew one thing for certain. Once a traitor is exposed, the others hide themselves even better. But the real shock came when facial recognition software analyzed the diplomat's face and returned a match under a completely different identity. The man wasn't a diplomat at all. He was an intelligence officer operating under a false identity, linked to the embassy of a European country recently active in Africa. The question now grew even larger. Was this just one man's betrayal, or an elaborate trap set against an entire nation. And for Traoré, basic security protocols were no longer enough. This wasn't just espionage, it was a psychological and strategic war. Before making the next move, he knew what had to happen first. The masks within had to be identified. When Ibrahim Traoré first witnessed the betrayal, he didn't react as a leader, but as a man. What struck him hardest wasn't the treason itself, but the face behind it. Someone he once considered a friend, now revealed to be part of a dark scheme. But this pain didn't paralyze him. It taught him to think deeper. He didn't speak. He didn't shout. He gave no orders. He simply waited and watched. Because some wars begin in silence and bring the deepest destruction. After the recordings, no changes were made to the advisor's position. He still attended presidential meetings, signed documents, and took part in decision-making processes. But what he didn't know was this. Every step he took was now under surveillance. Traoré quietly assembled a 4-person covert team. Their mission was to track the advisor's digital activity, conduct physical surveillance, and analyze the backgrounds of everyone he interacted with. The advisor's phone line was cloned. Shadow access was gained to his email accounts. Among the people he contacted were international NGO representatives, academics, and embassy staff. But one name stood out, a diplomatic consultant, appointed unexpectedly 2 years ago. In a short time, this person had gained access to several highly strategic files, and now they too were at the center of the investigation. For Traoré, this wasn't just a counter-espionage operation, it was also a psychological analysis. The advisor's behavior in meetings, the subtle changes in his facial expressions, the decisions he made, all of it was documented. And every evening, as the president read through the daily report, he would fix his gaze and repeat the same question. What did he know? And when did he know it? Because it wasn't just the betrayal that mattered, but its timing. If the connection had existed for long, then key decisions of the state might have been manipulated from within. That would make this not just a personal crime, but a strategic threat to national security. And then, one night, the moment arrived. A coded message sent to the advisor's phone was decrypted. It contained only one sentence. Second meeting in the same room, documents are ready. At that moment, Traoré's expression changed for the first time. This was no longer the act of betrayal, it was the second act of the game. But this time, he wasn't the victim. He was prepared. Because true leaders don't silence their enemies. They catch them in their own game. Watching the first recordings was only the beginning for Traoré. The real strategy was to wait for the second meeting, because the first was only a shadow, but the second would reveal the truth itself. The plan was flawless. The palace's hidden surveillance system was reactivated. Every detail in the room, lights, furniture, even the flower arrangements, was restored exactly as it had been during the first meeting, because traitors follow rituals, and they were bound to replay the same scene, unaware that this time they were being watched. At 10:34 p.m. the advisor entered the room. The same diplomat followed, but this time a third person joined them, a high-ranking official from the Ministry of the Interior. Known publicly for charity work and security reform, his presence at that table was shocking. The three sat down in silence and began to exchange documents. Their voices were hushed, but the room had been wired with top-grade audio surveillance. The recordings captured the diplomat handing over several classified files to the advisor. Among them, maps of the country's natural gas reserves, strategic defense positions, and diagrams of the new national security protocol. But one detail stood out above all: the documents were stamped as pre-approved. Someone from within the state had already sold the future without negotiation. Then came the second shock. At the end of the conversation, the advisor said quietly, "The president is suspicious, but he still hasn't figured out the game. This might be our last meeting. The documents must be delivered before anything changes." But what the advisor didn't know was this. The documents had already been recorded. The room was already sealed, and that sentence had already written his fate. Traoré watched the footage 3 times before dawn. He didn't just study the events, he studied the phases. Most of all, he watched his advisor's eyes. There was no fear in them, only familiarity. This betrayal wasn't new. It was just finally captured. Now a darker truth sat at the table. This was no lone act of treason. It was a network. And who else belonged to that network? Only the third act would reveal. President Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just a leader. He was a strategist holding the fate of a nation. His advisor, the diplomat, and the ministry official were all part of the same covert network. They had entered the same room with the same documents. But one question remained. What would the people feel once the truth was revealed? This time, Traoré chose not to remain silent. He organized an extraordinary public event under the name of a National Security Summit. The official agenda? Strategic reforms. But Traoré had other plans. The hall was specially prepared. A massive screen, reinforced audio, journalists, foreign observers, even African Union delegates filled the room, expecting policy talk. Instead, Traoré stepped up and pressed a button. The screen lit up with damning footage, the advisor handing over documents, the ministry official signing off secrets, and the chilling line, "The president is suspicious, but he hasn't figured out the game yet."